pleasure and honour for me, Max, to introduce you tonight. And it's great having you as a friend, and I wish you well. And I look forward to be able to do this many, many more times in the next 20 or 30 years we have. Thank you.
So, someone just turned the lights on there. If we can keep the ones at the front. Thanks, Niels. Thank you very much indeed. One item of correction in case there are any clients of mine out there. I haven't actually retired. I do spend half my time doing coaching and leadership advising, so I haven't actually retired. Anyway, thank you, and thank you all for coming. Congratulations. This is Europe's largest bookshop, apparently, so we've packed it out. They wouldn't let any more people in, so congratulations on that. As I look around, I sort of recognise about half the people, and then the other half are members of the Great British Public, which is, I think, a good mix, 50-50 mix there, because good news for two reasons. Firstly, you get a little bit more than the 2-minute flip through of the Family and Friends album that you would have got if you were only Family and Friends, but you don't get the whole bloated 1 hour long discussion that you would have got if you were fully paid up member of the public. So welcome to those of you who have not yet met, looking forward to meeting shortly. Okay, I was planning to speak for about 20 minutes, no more, perhaps 15-20 minutes, or rather let the mountains speak for themselves, actually. And talk only really briefly about the book itself. There'll be a Q&A a few minutes at the end or afterwards, sort of letting down if you want to specifically ask about the book. So I thought this would be a good title for today's brief talk: Scotland, her hills, my journey, and potentially your adventure. In this day of social media, I was interviewed by a blogger via Skype, whose first question was, "What's the tweet of the book?" So, for a slightly old bastard like me, that was 3 new things all in one sentence. I struggled through, and I figured this actually would. Now, he actually then did a write-up, which let me read the slightly longer version, just so you know what the book's about. And what he said was, this book offers a vivid and evocative account, and I'll tell you why I tried to do that, of what it's like to adventure on foot across Scotland. In the hope more people will be lured away from their smartphones and into at least a little bit of wilderness and adventure, so that people can reap the benefits of either a simple walk there or more challenging expeditions. And Scotland offers both, as you'll see, and as I'm sure you know. Scotland's mountains may not be the highest in the world, but they are certainly amongst the most awe-inspiring and enchanting. And they basically offer a mountainscape that you can, as a canvas, that you can decide what kind of journey that you want to paint on that and engage in. It's basically how an ordinary bloke goes about doing more Munros. Quick poem. So actually, I've just said before we start, this is about Munros. A Munro is a mountain in Scotland over 3,000 feet high, and I'll go into that bit more detail in a minute. Quick poll though, who's been to Scotland? Everybody's been to Scotland. Anybody been up a Munro or other mountain in Britain? Oh, yeah, look at that. Well, 50%. Anybody done all of them? Yes. There we go. Yeah, look. Fantastic. You're Richard, I didn't know. Okay, right, so part 1. Okay, part 1. The hills of Scotland. Why are they special? As I was walking across Switzerland and Corsica this summer, I tried to think, what really is so special about the hills of Scotland? Because they've always been my favourite place. I've been to the Himalayas, I've been to the Alps, other people in this room, by the way, people who climb the Matterhorn and things in this room, so I'm not positioning myself as an expert mountaineer here, but for me, Scotland's mountains always seem the best. And the question is, in my mind, why? And as I was plodding along, I think there's 3 things. Firstly, the access code in Scotland means you can kind of go anywhere you want, and more importantly, you can camp anywhere you want, and stop anywhere you want, which only in Norway and Sweden will you find that. Anywhere else, you can't do that. Secondly, the variety of the mountains. You can go to the Himalayas, they're all big and amazingly big and sharp and pointed, but Scotland's got more variety, I think. And thirdly, the culture, which is a kind of rich and interesting culture, whichever side of the border, whichever side of Alex Salmond you're on, it's an interesting culture. I just wanted to run through briefly. I mean, specifically Switzerland and the Alps, which are just wonderful, and I've forgotten how brilliant they are. But when you wake up, what's the first thing you see in the morning? And this was not Scotland. This was the Alpine pass route. Now the problem with the Alpine pass route is you're not allowed to go off the path. And so if you're stuck at the end of a day somewhere and you're on the path and there are trees on both sides, you're not really even allowed to camp there, I think. It's very difficult to figure out the exact legal position. But you could quite likely end up in a woodshed like this. You might ask, why did I put the tent up? I bought from this gentleman at Snow, by the way. It's a bit astonishing. There were a lot of rat droppings and mice droppings. I figured the Hillyberg Acto, for anybody who's a camper, that is a substantial tent and would certainly keep the rats out. So that's there's Scotland, right? There's my friend Niels, actually, contemplating Loch Clooney. This is very near Cape Wrath, camped on the beach. When we woke up the next morning, there were otters and seals there, room for 2 tents. So, access code in Scotland, you can go anywhere you want, within reason, you can put your tent up anywhere. It's great. Now, variety. I'm going to do a quick tour. This is the south, this is Ben Lomond. Not the most dramatic of mountains, but standing proudly there over Ben Lomond. The north, this is not the most northerly Munro, but this is, it's not photoshopped, it really is like that all the way up actually. That's Ben Clydrex, which is the second most northerly Munro. And these are not Munros at all, but this is Ben Loyal, sometimes called the Queen of Scottish Mountains. This is the north, again, quite different from Ben Lomond. The east is in the Cairngorms, standing on top of Ben Macdui, which we'll come back to in a minute, the second highest mountain in Britain. And this is the infant River Dee, which 100 miles later in Aberdeen is a big river. And actually, if you walk up here, you can see it oozing out of the ground. And hill walkers kind of titter about this because this is called the Devil's Penis, or it was called the Devil's Penis before Queen Victoria visited and they called it the Devil's Point. So that's east, and then the west is staggering. I'm sure lots of you have been there. It's Torridonian sandstone in this strata, and it's difficult. It's like the Grand Canyon, difficult to get scale here. There is a person in that photo. There. He's like the person there. So the variety of the mountainscape, also the variety of the rocks itself. This is a mountain called Slioch, which is on the northwest of Scotland. And this mountain, this rock here above the red line, is extremely old rock. It's 1 billion years old, literally. It was laid down as sand and compressed, and it's Torridonian sandstone, and that is 1 billion years old. But it's sitting on rocks which are 2 billion years old. And these rocks were laid down when all the tectonic plates were in completely different parts of the world. And interestingly, these are actually, they've figured out, river valleys. So this stuff was laid down 2 billion years ago, became land, got worn down as rivers. This isn't compressed and turned by the tectonic plate movement. These were actually worn down by rivers and things, and then filled in with rocks on top. Not many places in the world have older rocks, and therefore not many places have more variety. Hence, so many early geologists were, of course, Scots. Flora. I'm not going to go through this in detail. You've got the bluebells, this saxifrage. Children love this one because it's a carnivorous, well, it's actually insectivorous, but sundew, which catches plants, catches animals. The fauna, this is actually my favourite page in the book, it's page 81, and I always fancied myself as an artist, so that's why I like that one. Actually, the Scottish Tourist Board has come up with a big 5 to compete with Africa. And the slightly pathetic thing about it. But it is their big 5. Is the squirrel.
Against the elephant.
Yeah, exactly. Against the elephant and the tiger. Actually, I think it should be the 6th. The big 5 and the little 1. That's when I had to go outside of Ben Co one evening and make a phone call and the midges were out. head net. So the big five and all. Now, I was very tempted to try and match up famous Scottish personalities with the big five. And because this is being videoed and might be on the internet, I'm not going to go through the full list, but I just offer you the others. So, variety of fauna and flora. Now, talk about variety, you even find things that are neither animal nor plant. So, when I went to university, it was animal, plant, or mineral. But Professor Norman McLean would be able to comment on this. I think they've changed the taxonomy now, so for example, algae and fungi are not plants, and they're a different part of it. This is lichen, which is a combination of fungi and algae. And of course, lichen grow in many other parts of Britain and the world, but particularly they thrive in Scotland because they like clean air. Not like London, but like Scotland. So you don't see many lichens in Piccadilly Circus, but you do in Scotland.
Don't you bet?
On the bottom of, yeah, on the bottom of your car. Right, so now where does the variety come from? There's only 2 geology slides, so to entertain the geeks amongst us. How come there's all that complex? Now, I actually studied geology at university, and I'd forgotten all this. But 450 million years ago, you've got Scotland and Ireland, Southern Ireland there and Wales, all conveniently grouped together on one plate. But what's interesting is, although Scandinavia's on it, Scotland and Northern Ireland are actually really spread out. So what you eventually then see as, you know, the combined Scotland, there's actually bits of land that were deposited thousands of miles apart, millions and millions of years ago. And I mean, a little thing not many people know, when eventually Scotland and England dashed together, there's a bump here called, this is called the Iapetus Ocean. So there's something called the Iapetus Suture here, which is a raised bump, which is where Hadrian decided to build Hadrian's Wall. Because it was already raised up, saved a bit of building. Anyway, so that's partly what, now this is my favourite chart. This, which I know you can't see. Some people have sort of tried to piece together, where did Glen Coe come from when all this combination was happening? And where did the Cairngorm Mountains come from? And so, you know, a lot of people have been plodding around a lot of hills to try and piece that together. I think it's great. But it goes to the point about variety. Finally, culture. You know, there's obviously Bonnie Prince Charlie. This is Glenfinnan near the Harry Potter Viaduct, which obviously you know. But then, of course, there's haggis and there's whiskey, and you know, you could be sitting here, the pipes would be skirling across to the loch there. Again, you don't get that in Switzerland. Well, I did hear a guy with an Alpenhorn, but it didn't quite match the pipes. So for me, that's really the access code, the variety, and the richness of the culture. It's what makes me Scotland special. My journey, briefly, well, this is just a kind of combination of all the variety. I got into this stuff by accident, and as I say, there are other people in this room who are much more accomplished mountaineers than me. I never quite know whether to call myself a walker, hill walker. I'm not really a mountaineer. But I was Googling the 3 Peaks Challenge, which probably a number of you have actually done, the 3 highest mountains in Britain, in Scotland and Wales within 24 hours. And I came across Ben Nevis, okay, one of Scotland's Munros. So I did a bit more checking out and saw a range of very attractive photos and thought, okay, I'll nip up to Scotland and have a quick look around. And I was very lucky that I chose a particular route called the Ring of Steel, that's S-T-E-A-L-L, which means waterfall. And there is a steel waterfall, which is a bit of a strange expression because that just means waterfall. But anyway, it is Britain's 2nd highest waterfall, so it's a substantial one. And it starts off with a glorious, beautiful walk up what's a gorge that people sometimes call it the Himalayas of Britain, and you open out onto this beautiful meadow that's incredibly flat, deposited out of a glacier, and then smooth out. And then things become a bit more challenging. And specifically, there's a 3-wire bridge that you have to cross. So this actually, by Scottish standards, is quite a good 3-wire bridge. It's not a huge ravine below, but you probably don't want to drop in. And you've got to sort of negotiate your way across that. And then you get to the other side, and then you've actually got the foot of these waterfalls. So on a good day, there wouldn't be too much water there, but on a bad day, that's quite a challenging thing to do. So you're carrying on, this is probably 2-3 hours in, and then at some point, credit to a couple of people I met on the internet last week who kindly agreed I could use their photos. Because I was just out for a walk, I had no idea that I was starting on some Munro pilgrimage at the time. The walk goes up here and over the ridge and down the bottom, and the whole walk essentially starts off as a bit shady, unfortunately. You go down here, this is the waterfall, you go up here, and then you go around this ridge. Well, you either go this way and die coming down there, as people have done, or you come down the sensible way, which is that way. But it really is, you can see, it's like from a geography textbook at school. It is a glaciated valley. It's an 8-hour walk, and it's, you know, it is just beautiful. So that was how I personally started. Then I got interested in what these Munros. Hugh Munro, actually born in London, Scottish family, most of his life in Scotland. Just 1910 or so, India had been mapped. Everybody knew how high Mount Everest was. But nobody knew how many mountains there were in Scotland, and particularly how many mountains over 3,000 feet. So he was sent off. He, being landed gentry himself, knew that, because the access code didn't exist then, the other landowners wouldn't like him to be walking on their land. So many of these mountains he climbed at night, and with a barometer to more accurately than the Ordnance Survey tell how high it was. An intrepid pioneer, a man with vision in his eyes there as well. And those are the Munros, as they now stand. Some of them get demoted as they get more measured more accurately, and that's where they all are now. So sort of all over Scotland, but obviously the high bits. And to climb them all, you're basically talking about 2,000 kilometres horizontally. You probably have to do about 150 kilometres of going up and down and burn quite a few calories. And I mean, more generally, Scotland, if you look at the 1,000 highest summits in Britain, UK, all except 58 are in Scotland. So, you know, it is where all the high mountains are. So I gradually got more and more interested. I don't know if people have heard of the INPIN, the Inaccessible Pinnacle, so-called. So I was about 45, 46 when I started this. I thought, I don't want to be doing that when I'm 50. I better get it over with quickly. So I went to Skye and had 2 days out of 5, the other 3 days were completely rainy and wet. I'm going to see a video. Yeah. Unfortunately, they couldn't connect up the sound here, but that's the inner pin over there. And as you can see, you've got quite a bit of distance to go up. These are all pretty short clips because I didn't get one of this day. I then had a little sample of the west coast. This is called the Horns of Allegan. These are not Munros, but to get up here and take the photo, you have to climb the Munro. You're meant to go down this way, but I was by myself, and I chickened out. So. There is a bypass path. Does anybody know where it is, actually? Because I wasn't quite sure it looked like it sort of went down here, which actually looked worse than going over the top. So I bailed out on that, although I did go up the Munros. I went up another mountain, and I took a shortcut down from the top, and suddenly this deer jumped up. And those of you who walk in Scotland know that you don't normally get to see even a deer because they run off. So I thought, well, how come it let me get so close? And I realised that it had just given birth to a baby deer. It's a pity you haven't got the sound here, but it was just amazing. And they can walk within 10 minutes, so this would be less than 10 minutes old. And that's
okay. I'm sure he'll get to shoot more at some point, but the theory must just be cool. Amazing. Well, up you get.
You're a professional.
Phone whisperer.
There you go. I said, I'm not your mother, and he shook his head. eventually, I started to realise that this was becoming an obsession when something strange happened. And if you write films in Hollywood, you're meant to have in the middle a point of no return where the protagonist crosses that dividing line of sanity or goes across the gorge. And for me, I realised really after, well, I realised at the time, it's when I drove up to Glencoe, which was about 8-9 hours drive. I was going to camp in the car, and in the book you'll find some interesting tips on in-car camping with a fully inflated lino. Very intense. And moved stuff around, and I couldn't find my boots, and then I couldn't find my jacket, and then I couldn't find my rucksack. And it was bank holiday weekend, and the shops were closed, and I couldn't buy boots anyway and wear them unbroken in. So I thought of all sorts of ways I could accommodate, but it wasn't going to happen. So I drove down to London and picked up the one bag, the special bag that was left there and had remained in the hall, forgotten to get put in the car, and turned around and drove all the way back to Scotland. I figured that was probably getting a bit excessive. Now, when I got back to Scotland, unfortunately, well actually, to be honest, the real point of no return was I got back to Scotland and there I came across this.
Wow.
Can you hear it at the back?
Coal across Piccadilly, which is snowy. The coal. No apparent clear rock on the sunny side even. And when we get to the top, more snow along there, and more snow down there.
So I didn't have crampons, didn't have an ice axe, and I wasn't with anybody. So, and I climbed 1,000 metres already. So.
Do that snow, but I'm really not sure about going up there.
So, I mean, you know, so that's kind of what makes Scotland interesting. You do have to try and kind of make some decisions at some point. And I was sort of hanging on the edge. Unfortunately, this whole bloody thing is 3,000 feet. So this could have been a Munro. It's just that that's the Munro there. So, you know, if you go across this, you could slip this way. The snow can go off that way. Was there a path? It was quite difficult. So I spent 3 hours getting up there and had to go back without having bagged to the Munro. Yeah, so I got a bit obsessive. I kind of do 2 a day, 3 a day. I mean, you can push it and do 6 or 7, but these are quite hard days. Okay, at some point then I thought, okay, enough of this just ticking off. Let's go for the real trophies. Like, I hadn't been on Ben Nevis, for example. So then I tried to tick off some trophies, and the guy asked permission to do this. Photo didn't come back to me, so if it's your photo, I'm sorry. This is Ben Nevis here, and this is another Munro standing on here. And the fun way to go up there is to go along this thing, which is called, it's not quite as bad as it looks actually, but along this arete here, which is an exciting one. And has anybody, who's been up Ben Nevis? Okay, so like a third. If you don't want to see what it's like, then close your eyes, because it's not what you expect. This could be the Himalayas in a village. And over there's like lots of shrines. And this is that ring of steel over there.
Ring of steel over there.
That's the wood. Sorry, it's a bit anxious. And one of the things about Scotland is wherever you look, it's sort of whenever you look west, you've got these romantic views. Right, so here, Ben Nevis. Yeah, this was a tricky one. So near the end, so this is like the last week of my Munro bagging now, I went up to Skye, and it was quite a nice week, but and we went along. I joined a group of mountain guided walkers, and we said to people in the pub the previous night, oh, we're doing the three Munros at the north of Skye. And they said, how are you doing all those 3 in a day? And I don't know, we had too much to drink. And the next day we realised that the only way to do these 3 mountains all in one go is to go up this thing called Nicholson's Chimney, which on a good day would be okay, but it was absolutely bitterly cold and freezing. There is a rope here, and actually there is somebody else behind me there. But that was actually more scary than the so-called accessible pinnacle. I talked about having stopped just bagging and going to the beautiful places. So Skye, this is Glencoe. The Munros are actually more this way, but this is called the Pack of Glencoe. This is Anchellach. That's actually a painting. I do commissions, by the way, so let me know if you want a painting of a Scottish mountain. And this is a painting as well, Leargeth, which is on the west coast, Torridonian range as well. These are just stunning mountains, and despite what Neil said, you don't have to be super fit to do a day out on these mountains. This is perhaps my favourite, Knoydart, which sports around here, the most remote pub in Britain. It doesn't have a road, you can't get there by road, you can get there by boat. They voted 10 years ago or so whether they have a road or not, they said no roads. So it's a bit wild country out there, but there's some nice, you could stay in a nice hotel there as well if you wanted to. And so that was pretty much near the end of my bagging career. Let's see where we got to. Anyway, there. Oh yeah. Now the one thing, as I went back and looked at this and tried to make some sort of sense of this process I've gone through, I figured there was a sort of stage 1 which was getting hooked, and a stage 2 which was bagging as many as possible, and a stage 3 which was finding the really nice ones like Glencoe and the beautiful trophies. And then there was another stage which was about finding not a trophy view, but a trophy experience. And when going up the mountain, just next to this one, there's something called the South Glen Shield Ridge, which some of you who are Munro people will know what that is. If you do 8 or 9, I've forgotten, in one day. And I wanted to piece together a North Glen Shield Ridge, which was slightly more challenging. And so even by the middle of the day, I was pretty tired out. And I remembered back to when I'd been going up to Everest Base Camp, not Mount Everest, Everest Base Camp, simple trek. But I noticed the porters there who would carry 100, 120 kilos on their back. And they really managed to move, and I kind of read some scientific papers, they moved in a way where their centre of gravity just glided. It didn't move sideways or up and down or backwards and forwards, they just... And so I thought, well, I better conserve some energy here, and I did that for like 5 minutes and 10 minutes. And I really had the most remarkable experience there. I mean, it's the only time I think I really, apart from sex as a teenager, had that sort of fully integrated mind-body experience, where in this case it felt like you put your foot down and the mountain was almost kind of meeting your foot, or even lifting you up. It was a very surprising experience, and I think that was sort of pinnacle, if you like, of this whole process. So now, normally, I talked to a few schools in Waltham, and if any of you have a school, or you're a governor or a teacher or whatever, and would like you to come along and talk about the Munros, I'm happy to do so. I'd be delighted to do so. There's no charge. But the kind of things that, I think this provokes, and now that I've done the Munros, I try to keep them in mind as an experience to make sure, am I having enough adventure in my life? So, what is that one adventure? After that bucket list film, everybody's got their bucket list, but a bucket list in a way is too convenient. There's so many things, you never get them all done, so then you never do one of them. But what is that adventure, that's going to keep you alive, interested? I mean, to be honest, one of the great benefits of this is at this book launch I've reconnected with, where's Keith? Keith over there, who I haven't seen since university. I've connected with all sorts of other people. There's a human dimension to any adventure, and perhaps one of the reasons why we shouldn't just sit in South Kensington on a smartphone and computer. So that's not a discussion to have here, but I think it is an important thing to keep in mind. Right, I'd just like to say thank you to a bunch of people who I don't really need to look at the list for. Look at the list. Does anybody have? List. I've lost the list. Oh, yeah. Well, probably missed somebody out then. So I'd like to thank Francesca, who's my agent. Where's Francesca there? Thank you very much. This is a weird book, I have to say. It's not one person climbs all the 8,000-foot mountains, right, in the world, 80,000 meter mountains in the world. It's not, you know, somebody who's down and out, who transforms their life. It's a difficult book for a publisher to decide to go for, really. I hope you find it an interesting and exciting one. And you know, one of the reasons I said at the beginning that I tried to make this particularly evocative is I started writing this when my father, who died 3 years ago, had the early stages of Alzheimer's-like disease. I could see what it's like to start losing your memories. So I really, to be honest, wrote this initially for myself as vividly as possible, so I would, for as long as possible, have these memories. So it's a strange book in that sense. It doesn't have somebody conquering the world. So thank you, Francesca, for managing to sell it, and thank you, Luath, for managing to buy it. So that's really the first one. A lot of people helped me along the way. Two people I'd like to pick out particularly. Niels, thank you very much. Niels kind of was dragged up to Skye and helped me there and a lot of different places and in the writing of the book. So thank you, Niels. Appreciate it. And, you know, amongst my many relatives who've helped me, my cousin Jessica, who's very creative. Where's she gone? Oh, she left. Where's Jessica? Oh, there she is. She's shy. Who's in the creative business and very creative. So thank you for that, your particular help. I'd like to, if you were here, thank my father, who only really, he wasn't a father who had a lot of advice, but he did, I always remember say one thing, which is, in life, it's important to at least just be a little bit adventurous. And I thought it was an interesting way of putting it. He wasn't forcing me to go out and conquer stuff, but just, you know, be at least a little bit adventurous, which is stood, I think, stood me well. And finally, my mother, who, if you read the book, you'll find out how she took me up my first Munro before I was even born. I don't know, a pregnant woman climbing Ben McDewey is a kind of interesting prospect, but also, more recently, thank you for all your help for actually writing the book, and my mother's fun but interesting quotations, some of which is sprinkled through the book. So, thank you also for coming here. Now, I'd like to leave you some thoughts. There's a chap who I think is just a brilliant writer, and he, in the 30s and 40s, was one of the founding fathers of Scottish mountaineering. And he wrote something on the Scottish Himalayan expedition. And by the way, they do say that climbing Mount Everest is good practice for Scottish winter mountaineering. And Murray himself wrote several books, one of which he wrote when he was a prisoner of war, in a prisoner of war camp, on lavatory paper, because there was nothing else to write. So he wrote a whole book about Scotland, mountaineering, on that, which was then confiscated and destroyed. So he then had to write it all over again. And I think that's an incredible act of stamina. And there's a few other people who tangentially I mentioned in the book who've had to rewrite large volumes, but he was one of them. But this is what he said actually about going on an adventure. I think it's quite interesting. He's talking about not really having done much yet to get this Himalayan expedition going. And he said, but when I said nothing had been done, I erred in one important matter. We had definitely committed ourselves, and we were halfway out of the ruts. We had put down our passage money, booked a sailing to Bombay. This may sound too simple, but it's great in consequence, he goes on to say. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favour all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance. which no man could have dreamt would ever have come his way. Finally, he goes on to say, I learned a deep respect for one of Goethe's couplets, whatever you can do, or dream you can do, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. So I think that's the ultimate call to adventure, and I hope my book sort of helps a little bit on that way. Thank you very much.